It was April 25th, 1957, springtime in London. The air in Hackney carries the usual mix of city life, the scent of damp pavements, the distant rattle of double-decker buses, and the ever-present hum of a working-class borough going about its day. Post-war Britain is still rebuilding, and places like Hackney bore the scars, sooty brick terraces, smoky chimneys and streets filled with kids making their own fun, kicking tin cans and chalking goals onto factory walls. And in the middle of it all, in a hospital bed in the East End, a boy was born. Eric. A name that would one day echo through pubs and on televisions across the country. But for now, he was just another lad brought into the world in a time when money was tight but character was rich. His parents are not wealthy, but they are tough. His dad, a plasterer, worked with his hands, shaping walls, smoothing rough edges, a skill that Eric would inherit in a different way, though no one knew it yet. His mum kept the family running, a sharp-tongued, no-nonsense East End woman who knew how to hold her own. Hackney wasn't an easy place to grow up. The streets raised kids as much as their parents did, teaching them to be quick with their wits and even quicker with their fists if needed. But it was also a place of community. Pubs, markets, and the ever-present sound of laughter mixed with the occasional row, because life in London's East End was never quiet. Little Eric, like most boys around him, learned the unspoken rules early. Stand your ground, have a bit of cheek, and always, always, back yourself. By the time Eric Bristow was a young lad, Hackney had already shaped him. Sharp, cocky, fearless. He had that East End swagger, the kind that made him stand out in a crowd, always ready with a quick word or a knowing smirk. School never really had his attention, but the streets, the pubs, the places where life really happened, that's where young Eric found himself. It was in those smoky London boozers, tucked away in back rooms filled with the clink of pint glasses and the chatter of regulars, that he first laid eyes on a dartboard. The game was everywhere, but to most, it was just a way to pass the time, a pub tradition alongside warm ale and a packet of crisps. To Eric, though, it was something more. He was hooked from the start. The thing about darts, it's a working man's game. No fancy equipment, no sprawling fields or expensive kits, just 3 arrows and a board, and the only thing that mattered was skill. And Eric, even as a kid, had plenty of that. He wasn't just good, he was a natural. The way he held the dart, the way he stood at the hockey with the easy confidence of a man twice his age, it was clear he had something special. He started playing in local pubs as a teenager, squeezing into smoky rooms filled with old men who had been throwing darts for decades. They didn't expect much from a skinny kid with a cocky grin until he started winning and winning and winning. Before long, they weren't calling him lad anymore. They were calling him Trouble. Word spread. There was this kid from Hackney who could throw darts like a man possessed. And one night, in a pub thick with cigarette smoke, the kind of place where the carpet sticks to your shoes and the laughter is loudest near the bar, Eric caught the eye of the right man, Tommy Cox. A sharp-eyed talent spotter, a man who knew a champion when he saw one. Cox watched the kid throw, saw the way he handled himself, the way he oozed confidence. He didn't just see a good player, he saw a future world beater. Under Cox's guidance, Eric moved into the amateur circuit, and it was there that his legend began to take shape. The cocky teenager from Hackney was suddenly a rising star, taking on seasoned players, dismantling them one by one with an unshakable belief in himself. He played like he had nothing to lose, and in those early days he didn't. The tournaments got bigger, the stakes got higher. But Eric? He didn't flinch, he didn't second guess, he just threw, and he won. By the late 1970s, Eric Bristow wasn't just some cocky kid throwing darts in East End pubs. He was a name, a force, the kind of player that made older, seasoned pros nervous the moment he stepped up to the hockey. His throw was effortless, his precision deadly, and his mouth always running. He wasn't just winning, he was making sure everyone knew about it. Darts back then was changing. The sport was moving from the back rooms of smoky pubs onto the bright lights of television. And Eric, with his natural charisma, his brash confidence, and his undeniable talent, was made for it. The professional circuit was calling, and Bristow answered. He joined the British Darts Organisation, stepping into a world filled with tough, seasoned throwers, blokes who had been playing the game long before Eric ever picked up his first dart. But he didn't care. He had no respect for reputations. Then came the rivalries. John Lowe was the ice-cold marksman of darts, the perfect contrast to Bristow's fiery swagger. Born in Derbyshire, he played with machine-like precision, his smooth, unshakable throw making him one of the greatest finishers in the game. While Bristow thrived on mind games and big personalities, Lowe was emotionless, disciplined, and impossible to rattle. Their rivalry was legendary. Lowe, the silent assassin, and Bristow, the cocky showman, trading blows on the biggest stages. And then there was Jockey Wilson, the scrappy, unpredictable Scotsman, with a face like he'd just come off a shift at the docks. Wilson was everything rough and raw about darts, a man who lived as hard as he played. When he and Bristow met, it was fireworks. The respect was there, but so was the fire. But Eric wasn't just another name in the mix. He was aiming for something bigger. And in 1980, he got it. The Embassy World Darts Championship, Jolly's Cabaret Club, Stoke-on-Trent, the biggest stage in darts, the kind of tournament that separates the good from the great. And in the final, standing across from him, was Bobby George, the showman of the sport, all flash, gold jewellery, and a walk that belonged on a Vegas stage. A man who knew how to work a crowd just as well as Bristow did. But on that night, there was no stopping Eric. He played like a man possessed, taking control early, never letting George breathe. And when that final dart sank into the double, he raised his arms, his mouth twisting into that familiar knowing grin. Eric Bristow, world champion. The boy from Hackney had done it, but he wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. The 1980s belonged to Eric Bristow. He wasn't just winning, he was dominating, turning the Oche into his personal stage and backing up every ounce of his cocky swagger with pure talent. Between 1980 and 1986, he won 5 world titles, cementing himself as the face of darts, a man who played like he was born to win. And through it all, he carried a name that became as famous as his victories, the Crafty Cockney. The nickname wasn't born in a smoky pub or on a darts stage, but in a bar in Santa Monica, California, of all places. In the late 70s, Bristow had visited the States and stumbled upon a British-themed pub called the Crafty Cockney, its walls lined with Union Jacks and its atmosphere dripping with East End charm. The name stuck with him, and when he returned to England, he embraced it fully, brash, cheeky, and unmistakably London, just like him. With the nickname, the persona was complete. Bristow wasn't just a darts player, he was a character, a showman, a villain to some and a hero to others. He'd strut up to the Oche with his chest puffed out, head tilted in that signature, knowing smirk, throwing darts like a man who had already decided he'd won before the first double had been hit. He'd rattle opponents, play mind games, and let them know, without a doubt, who the king of the sport was. But it wasn't just talk. He backed it up. With 5 world titles, countless major wins, and a presence that transformed darts into a spectacle, Eric Bristow was darts in the 1980s. The Crafty Cockney was more than a nickname. It was a brand, a legend, and a warning to anyone who dared challenge him. By the late 1980s, Eric Bristow was still the Crafty Cockney, still strutting to the Oche with that signature smirk, still winning. But something wasn't right. The man who could land a double without thinking, the man who made darts look effortless, was suddenly hesitating. His arm would lock up mid-throw. The release wasn't smooth. The dart wouldn't leave his fingers when he wanted it to. Dartitis. A cruel, invisible opponent that no amount of practice, confidence or bravado could shake off. It wasn't an injury, not something you could ice or rest. It was mental, a glitch in the brain of a man who had spent his whole life throwing without fear, and it took away his greatest weapon, his control. He fought it, of course, tried to power through, tried to ignore it, but in a game where precision is everything, even the smallest hesitation can be fatal. The wins became rarer, the titles stopped coming, and by the early 1990s, the younger generation, players like Phil Taylor, a man Bristow himself had taken under his wing, began to take over. The king was being dethroned. But Bristow was never just a player. His name was bigger than the trophies, bigger than the titles. Even when his playing career faded, he remained a giant in the game, mentoring, coaching, and calling the shots from the commentary box with the same sharp tongue that had once rattled opponents. He had built darts into what it was, and even when he wasn't winning, he was still Eric Bristow. The crafty Cockney might have lost his grip on the dart, but he never lost his grip on the game. Even in his later years, Eric Bristow was still the crafty Cockney. Still loud, still sharp, still the man who had made darts what it was. He wasn't throwing for world titles anymore, but he was still a giant in the game, coaching, commentating, and always speaking his mind, whether people liked it or not. But time is an opponent no one beats. Bristow's health started to decline. Years of hard living, boozing, smoking, the old-school darts lifestyle had taken their toll. His heart wasn't as strong as the man himself. On April the 5th, 2018, Eric Bristow was in Liverpool, watching a Premier League darts event at the Echo Arena. He was among friends, among the game he had helped build. Then, suddenly, without warning, he collapsed. A heart attack. The paramedics tried, but it was too late. At just 60 years old, the crafty Cockney was gone. The news spread fast and the tributes poured in. Fans, players, rivals, John Lowe, Phil Taylor, Bobby George, all of them knew what he had meant to the sport. That night in the arena where he had been watching, the crowd broke into chants of his name. Because Eric Bristow wasn't just a darts player, he was darts. And even in death, his legend was never going to fade.
He's coming down for the treble 19.
59.
Dismissed.
Well, Bobby required 141.
Bobby's got a chance. There's the 3-dart shot. He's got the 60. Treble 15. Lovely shot.
123.
Well, Arbinger's doing this game for a while. I don't remember this much tension. For the championship, Shanghai on 20s. He's got the 60. 20. Double top.
80.
A whisker out. Double 9 and the set to level it up.
Bobby, you require
4.
80. That's the vote of peace.
Nice. Awkward one. 1. No, he
No
busted.
score.
That says it all. So here we have championship point.
Eric, you require
The
40.
crafty Cockney, Eric Bristow, rated number 1 in the
That's
world,
the vote of peace, ladies and gentlemen.
needs a single double to become the world champion. Wants double 10. Eric Bristow from Stoke Newington becomes the 1980 Embassy Professional Champion of the World with fantastic darts here at Joyce.